So I am thrilled to be introducing another roundtable for Entech. This is more I&I, administration of your program. And when it comes to our panel, first I'll introduce myself. I'll be your moderator today. My name's Christine Gonzalez. I am storage tank queen at Entech Engineering. With my panel, I've got two people from Entech. Mike Sassaman. He loves getting down and dirty with operators out in the field, trying to figure out what the problem is and then working out the best solution for our clients. He's been with Entech for the past 5 years as a senior project manager. Eric Moore, well, he's a total package. He's an engineer, he's an operator, he's a consultant. He was a recent utility manager. He worked alongside Entech for many years while he was the executive director at the West Branch Regional Authority. And he's now working for Entech as a project manager. And the cool thing is he built an entire I&I program from the ground up. So I'm like, hey, Eric, can you just talk for 30 minutes and tell us everything that was involved with that? So he'll be sharing lots and lots of good stories with us. And our panels, if you've seen a lot of our roundtables, they work really, really well because we love bringing in outside friends, people we admire and love working with. So Mike Sassaman has said, hey, you've got to get Brian Boland. So Brian is a shareholder and director at Kozloff Stoudt Attorneys, and he has a long history working as a solicitor for many municipalities in Pennsylvania for the past 36 years. What's the one you've been there the longest, Brian?
Probably Borough of Lyons since 1985.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, you've seen a lot then. Mm-hmm. So before we actually get into any sort of Q&A, so a reminder, if you're tuning in, we're taking your questions from the audience. Please submit them via the Q&A button. I want to launch a poll. We like doing this because it gives us a sense of what you guys need in the audience, what your biggest struggles, what your questions are when it comes to I&I program. So I'm going to launch the poll, and you'll see the question is, what are your biggest struggles administering I&I programs? And this is whether you're actually in charge of it or you're an engineer or trying to help out someone with one. So we've got six different options there. This will help us to sort of know how to direct the conversation and the questions today, in addition to any questions you guys have that you're submitting out there. I'll give you another 5 seconds and then we'll show the results of the poll. Okay, let me end that polling. And I will share the results so we can see. Okay, so it looks like how to address I&I and track the results. Okay, so that's number 1 and number 2. Then it looks like finding funding. If you're interested in finding funding, there was this great roundtable 2 weeks ago on finding funding for your wastewater and water projects. So I'll make sure you guys get a link for that. Very fascinating conversation, all sorts of good ideas and things to know. And then formulating a plan. Okay, so thank you to the audience so much for that feedback. That really, really helps us to know what direction to go here. So one of the questions that came up yesterday or this week when I was talking with the panelists was, well, does everyone have I&I problems? And because I'm a tanky, so I don't know much about this stuff, but these guys deal with it all the time. So Mike Sassaman, does everyone have I&I problems?
I would say not everybody does. I would say everybody has some amount of I&I, but whether or not it's a problem is different in some towns than there are others. It depends a lot on how the sewer system was built, what materials it was built out of, how well it was built, how well it was inspected when it was built to make sure everything is done right. And then things change over time, but not everybody has the problem. If you do, you probably know you do. One of the biggest indicators, I think, is always the Chapter 94 report that gets put in every year. It shows you a graph of your flows for the last 5 years and projects ahead, and it's going to tell you. And you want to keep on this stuff and try to do something with it before DEP is the guy that comes in and tells you you have a problem.
Absolutely. I have to second that. You don't want DEP involved because this is a complex issue that is in part political. And having DEP involved can be helpful, but the timing has to be right. And I think when it comes to do you have a problem, I think the better angle on that is, what is the problem that you have that you don't know about? Because if you're not looking, you're not going to find it. And a lot of folks don't look because they really don't want to find it, because then they got to fix it. So if you look at a process on the whole for investigating I&I, doing inspections, popping manhole lids, being active and out there, there are a lot of small systems that just don't have that. They just don't have folks in the field regularly poking around and looking for stuff. And that's why you don't find those problems. One of the biggest benefits and biggest burdens of an I&I program is you're going to find stuff, but you're also going to learn about your system and find the problems you didn't know you had. And as much of a political football as it can be and difficult, you can also make a lot of new friends when you fix problems that were out there for a long time that you didn't know about. And now you do. So then you go ahead, you fix them. And folks who had backups in their basements and just got tired of calling the borough because it never got fixed, things like that.
So when you said it can be political, is that political aspect of it?
Oh, the politics is, as anything, when you start mandating things, you have to be careful. So if you're going to mandate house inspections, and a lot of folks are very much against having you come in, that's a political issue. Just having the will and the focus to do an I&I program is inherently political. You have either a borough council or a authority council or authority board, sorry, or you're dealing with those folks on a regular basis. And you have to get buy-in. You have to have a solicitor who is willing to support you and help you through the process, because there are a lot of little legal things that you've got to make sure you have right in order to be able to exercise the program correctly.
So Brian, as a solicitor, what is your role with I&I programs?
Usually, and to back up one question though, I agree with Mike and Eric that one of the more challenging things is once DEP gets involved, their solutions are usually just too broad, too big, too non-specific. Put another pump in a pump station, meter this whole section of your development or your township, with meters and things of that nature. And it's honestly, I'm not the engineer, but it's wasted money and time. As we talked the other day when we were on earlier, I think a lot of this, and Eric and Mike can jump in, a lot of this is, the death by 1,000 cuts. There are a lot of little places that you got to go look. And if you're fighting with DEP at the same time that you're looking for all these little things that are probably wrong, you're not going to get to spend the money where it's going to have the most impact. And you won't be able to spend proper amounts of money to get the impact you need. You're going to be spending big amounts of money on just things that DEP from Harrisburg can conclude are the way this ought to work in your system. And you go in, Mike and I have been up at meetings with DEP where, we're banging our heads on the table saying, this isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about this. And their minds are made up, and now you're just arguing with them. So I agree with Eric. The sooner you get it started and the sooner you're able to target small areas and do small things, we know you're not going to find the one smoking gun. There isn't a small tributary to the Schuylkill River hooked up to your sewer system. That's not where the problem is. And then Eric's right too. You need to look at ways to get in the house that hopefully don't involve administrative search warrants and things of that nature, which you could get into if you absolutely had to. But then you'd need pretty specific cause to know that something's coming out of a house, such as you had a camera in a line and you could see a lateral and you can see, clear water coming down that lateral. Short of those sorts of things, you hopefully can implement a system where you can check system wide and get a lot of cooperation from the community.
So how is it that you help out your clients, Brian?
Well, we sometimes help them write literature to go out in the bills to the clients to explain what is going on in the I&I process. that, hey, we're going to have to build a lagoon. Hey, we're going to have to upgrade the system. Hey, we're going to have to spend, millions of dollars if we don't have the opportunity to get in and check for floor drains or outside drains or things of that nature. We need your help so we don't have to spend this money. You'll get some buy-in doing that. Of course, you're always going to have some stubborn spots where people aren't going to help you. But I think getting some buy-in from the community so that at least maybe 50-60% of the people will go along with your program right off the bat will be a big help to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent.
And I'll add to that. That communication and buy-in is essential. And as mentioned, it might only be 60% at the beginning. But what we saw at West Branch was a growing acceptance of what we were doing and a growing understanding, because you have to handle it in a balanced way. You're an enforcement process, but you're also trying to get people to learn about why it's important to not allow your sump pump to go into the line. Yeah. And the more you communicate with your customers, the better chance you have of educating them so they understand why you want to come in, why you want to look. And then you offer them flexibility. So our rule was you have to let us in to inspect, or you can hire a plumber and he can fill out our form. And he can sign off at the bottom. He's a certified plumber. We'll accept that, but that's at your cost as a homeowner. So the trade-off is, if you don't want the government poking in, you can do it yourself, but it's not going to be at no cost. So there are ways to be flexible. You have to be respectful. People are going to be angry that you're poking into their lives and telling them that they're doing something wrong. And you have to understand that this is not something that they think about on a daily basis. And we're intruding into their day. We're going to ask them to take some time out of their schedule to let us in, or to hire a plumber to come in and have a cost. And a lot of them know, well, I thought I had problems in my lateral. Now they're going to find them. Now I'm going to have to fix it. And so you have to keep that rapport going. And you'll always have the angry folks that just don't want you poking into their stuff. And you have to find ways to respectfully work with them.
Now, when it comes to, go ahead, Mike.
One of the things that I think is important, and probably all of us on the panel, and probably everybody who's in our audience for this meeting today understand it, but we're talking about separate sanitary sewers, where only sanitary sewage is supposed to go into these, get to the treatment plant, be treated, and then discharged usually to a local stream. Not like storm sewers that are out in your street, or even some places that have combined sewers. So there's a lot of people living in houses that don't even understand that these are separate things and they go in separate places. So educating the public to let them know what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing, or legally doing or not, or illegally doing, is an important part of this whole program.
Yeah, Mike's absolutely right, because as the sort of the non-professional here in the sanitary sewer, I think you always have to remember, just as Mike is saying, is to back up and make sure your community knows that storm sewer grate out there, that's not the sanitary sewer, and the stuff coming from their rain leaders that they think they're putting into the sewer, and it doesn't matter because it all mixes and does all that stuff anyway. They're two separate systems, and I think you have to start there and make sure people know that, because the average person just doesn't ever give it a thought.
No, it's just they're taking care of everything. Okay, and a question for you, Eric, when it came to notifying people out there, like, how do you educate them? Is it like mailings you send them, or did you use social media, or what are the most effective ways of educating the people?
In my experience, there is no effective way. You just have to keep trying. It's one of the hardest parts of doing the job is reaching the people, because they don't want to talk about poop. They don't want to hear from the government. It's just a general, they got busy lives, they got kids, they got other things going on. And here you want to tell them about poop. So it's a difficult thing. We used a mix of, like, door hangers were effective in getting people's attention, and then posting things on our website that gave them more information for what was briefly discussed on the door hanger. We didn't get into social media very much, because that is a two-edged sword. You can get a lot of distraction, bad information to circulate in social media, and it requires a lot of effort. So if you have a young person on your staff, and I shouldn't say young, if you have a person on your staff who really likes social media and is willing to babysit a social media account, then yeah, you can try it. If you have a bunch of people like we did who were really not social media oriented, it makes it a lot harder because you don't have someone with the right skill set and interest level to maintain that. And once you start social media, you have to keep it up. It's
Good
not something
point.
you can just jump into every so often.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
to follow up on Eric's point there about the education, obviously in a new development, you really don't have the pile of illegal connections. You don't have the basement drains, the garage drains, and those sorts of things. And you're not as likely to have the rain leaders connected to the sewer because they were designed to go out in the street or out in the backyard into a pit. But in an older home, telling people, hey, you shouldn't have your rain leaders or your basement drains or your garage drains connected to the sewer. If I got that, I'd go, that's nice. Well, I don't know if my stuff is connected. And as Eric says, and I'm busy. So I'm going to pack my kids up in the car and take them to their soccer game, and I'm never going to think about it again. It isn't until somebody follows up and says, hey, look, there's a way for us to know whether or not your drains are connected and whether or not you're part of the problem, and we would need to pour dye down it, or we need to check it in some way or other. And then by and large, most people are pretty cooperative with it. But then you have to say to them, now look, it isn't a big deal to fix this. You can plug the drain, you could dig the drain out and put a sump pump in there and pump it out into your side yard, something like that. Most of the time, if people are not going to go figuring it out themselves just because they got a letter, they're going to go, that's nice, doesn't apply to me. And then the second thing, when they do find out it applies to them, they need to understand, hey, this isn't a $10,000 fix. It's not that. There'd be a little bit of expense involved, but it's not a huge fix. And then you hope that it's a permanent fix, that they don't disconnect the sump pump that's in the sewer, and then as soon as we leave, they just hook it back up again. But usually,
so just to jump in, it's a good point. The process is not once and done, and you'll have people that disconnect and do the work and do what you need them to do, and they'll put their sump pump out in the yard, and then over the summer the sump pump turns the yard into a swamp, and they're not happy, so they put it back in the sewer because they don't have any alternatives. So in that brings up the fact that this is a spider web, so everything's connected to everything else. If you don't have good storm sewers and you can't get the water away from the house, the sump pumps are going back in the sanitary sewer. That's what people are going to do. So you have to work with the boroughs and the townships, if you're an authority, to make sure they understand they may have to do some work there. And when you get to the expense level for the customer, if you tell them, hey, you've got a floor drain and that's illegal and you have to seal that up, that may be the way they get the storm water out of their house. They may have water in their basement, but it's not a finished basement, so they don't care. But once you seal that drain, they're going to care. So it could be an expense anywhere from $25 for a plug and some cement to a couple $1,000. So what we did, we went through the house inspection process, and then we said, we're not going to make you fix stuff right away, because we want to do this in a way that gives you, the homeowner, time to get ready, save a little money. We know how tight things are, how difficult the economy can be, but also it gives us a chance to go looking for grant money. So especially in our communities, which were low to moderate income heavy, what we would do is we'd look by area to area, neighborhood to neighborhood, and do the inspections, find out who needed to fix their laterals, and say, okay, we'll go to the Community Development Block Grant Program at the state. And some of the boroughs, unfortunately, neither of the boroughs in the West Branch system were entitlement communities, which got regular infusions of CDBG money. But all the others, and ours included, could go for specific grants. So we had a number of awards. I think we had $100,000 in Muncie and $100,000 in Montgomery for just lateral fixes. And that's a no-cost fix to the homeowner for the portion of the lateral that goes up to the house. So if it's not just the part that's the authority's part, If the authority owns that part, it's a whole other discussion. But we were able to, the point is we were able to do it in a timed way so we could maximize the opportunity for grant, minimize the cost impact on the vulnerable population, and give the people who had enough money to do the work time to save some money and not have it be a shock, because that's what people would object to. We gave them 2 years to get the process done effectively.
Okay, excellent. Okay, we've got a bunch of questions that have come in, so thank you to our audience. Keep submitting the questions. We'll run through them, so use that Q&A button. So first question that came in, this is sort of tying in with something we were speaking to earlier. How can we get the DEP to understand that the utility knows better solutions than someone who doesn't really understand their system, perhaps like the people at the DEP? So any ideas on how to manage that sort of situation?
We need a DEP person on this panel to give us that answer. Otherwise.
Well, okay. And like, here's the thing. You may be saying, hey, you're doing an I&I roundtable. Where's Brian Killian? Where's Ed Petrosky? Where's Scott Novotnik with the DEP? They're all working on a I&I issue right now. There's this big conference right now going on to help one of our clients. So we are planning on doing another one where we will pull in some DEP people so we can get some feedback from them on how to best work together.
Yeah, but I think part of the answer to that question is that it goes back to Eric's point. As soon as the sooner you can get out in front of your I&I issue, you go out and you do all your early inspections and you do some early corrections. You sort of keep a distance between yourself and DEP, and every time you make a little correction, you're keeping that distance from them. Each day that goes by that you don't fix anything, they're closing in on you from behind. Once they catch up with you, it's very challenging to get them to understand your system, short of saying, this whole northeast section, you should meter that, and in this whole section you need 3 new pumps, and so the problem I think is, and then once that happens, then it's a matter, you just have to schedule meetings with them up in Harrisburg, and you got to keep pounding away at them, and just be relentless with them. But it gets challenging once they get you in a consent order and decree. Now you're negotiating it kind of against yourself, and it's not that you can't get positive results out of it. You just want to stay a few steps ahead of that consent order and decree as much as you can, so that you have the option to do what Eric and Mike are talking about, which are the early fixes. But it's getting your authority or your board or your township to focus on the issues before they become a big problem.
Yeah. Eric?
So I'd add to that, it's about relationships as well. So the department is bound by the rules and the law, but it's also a relationship issue where if you build trust over time and you stay ahead of them. I love that that example, that where you're staying ahead of them. If you're staying ahead of them and they know that you're staying ahead of them because you are doing work towards fixing the problem, you can prevent a lot of the human nature issues that get involved later, where you become someone who's non-compliant. And if they believe you're non-compliant and you're just not going to be helpful and you really don't take it seriously, they're going to treat you very differently than if you demonstrate that you're doing the best you can with the resources that you have. I think there, in my experience over 25 years, in the cases where we were making an effort, we got a lot more leeway, and they would try to help us rather than punish. You do not want to be under a consent order. The first thing, if you're capacity limited and enter a consent order because you're exceeding the capacity of your plant, they will limit the number of connections that you can have. So any growth that occurs isn't going to happen in your area. I think the Borough of Jersey Shore, I worked with them before I went off the West Branch. They were put under a consent order because of excess flow. They had a connection ban, essentially they called it, but it was really, you had to go play Mother May I with DEP and say, we took out 10,000 gallons of flow. We want to add 2,000 gallons in new connections. And then they would say, okay, you can do it. You proved it. But what got heard by the development community was ban. And even 5 years after we had that ban lifted, they were still hearing that in the development community about, well, why would I go to Jersey Shore? They're under a connection ban. It's going to be hard to get sewer capacity.
Okay, interesting. Question from the audience. This is from Betty Evans. She asks, do you think having a community open house day after COVID restrictions are relaxed, would that be a good idea to involve the townspeople to learn about our interest in I&I and educate them? Has anyone ever heard of anything like that?
I can jump in on that. Mike knows we have, 2 new attorneys here in the office that were working on something for an authority, and they went up to meet Mike at the plant for a specific item related to an insurance claim. And I said to them very specifically, you must be sure that you take a tour of this plant from Mike before you leave. You don't know how a sewage treatment plant works. And until you go through that plant, you have no idea. What your view of the plant is completely different. So I absolutely think that getting the community to see the plant and how it works, you guys all take it for granted. It's a really cool thing. And it's exactly the opposite of what every person in the community thinks is going on in that plant. They think you're filtering it somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a relationship issue. I mean, you want to build your relationship with your customers. We did hold a couple of open houses. It was on our to-do list at West Branch on a constant basis to come up with a way to have people there so they could see the plant, so they could understand, who the staff are, the faces that they see, how many people do you have working for you? Why do you need so many people? You see the equipment. They can then put 2 and 2 together. We did little demonstrations on here's how a televising truck works. Come see this. Here's how the jet vac truck works. All the cool toys, so to speak. So they understand the level of effort required. And the people who came and understood definitely were then going back to the community and saying to their friends and family, yeah, that was way more than I thought ever was involved with this stuff.
And you just pointed out something so important. You educate one person, they tell their friends and family. So it grows. I love that. Mike?
Sometimes I've seen so many times when you have an open house after you've spent millions of dollars at a wastewater plant or something and nobody shows up. Or you try to invite these people out to come to this thing and very few have any interest in it. The way I've always tried to do it, if I'm out on the street and there's a televising truck there and the people are walking by and they're looking, come on over here, come on inside, come and look what's going on, see, and explain a little bit to them. I think that's when they'll go tell a neighbor, hey, you should see what they're doing out there. And it's all public relations.
Yeah.
At the risk of diverging too far, a big part of that process is your staff. So a lot of the smaller systems that I was a consultant for and the systems that we inherited at West Branch had minimal staff. They were overworked and they were mostly at the plant, and not a lot of field work was being done that really needed to be done. Once we put those folks out in the field and then we trained them and we helped them, helped our guys get good, our guys and gals get good at it. And then they became our ambassadors to the community. And they were doing, what Brian was saying and Mike was saying. They were interfacing directly with the public saying, oh, you want to know what's in the hole? Come on over and be careful. You want to see what's in the truck? Yeah, we'll show you the televising stuff. And they did a lot to work on the PR side to say, hey, we're not the enemy. We're not the regulatory sewer Nazis here to kick in your door and inspect your toilet. We're out here trying to keep the system running and keep you all safe and healthy. And that staff interaction, if you can get staff to buy in and you can treat the staff right, treat them like people and not parts of a machine, they'll do that work for you and they'll do it happily.
Excellent. Another question from the audience. What local ordinance revisions can be used to facilitate the I&I reduction program? Eric, you're smiling and nodding your head.
Yeah, there's always a discussion about ordinances versus, the rules and regulations of an authority and who has control. Is it the township that sets the rules over the authority? And essentially the Municipal Authorities Act empowers the authority to have rules and regulations. And so the authority board sets them if you're served by a municipal authority. And so having good, strong rules and regulations is a good thing for both an authority and a township and a borough, you want to make sure you update them every 5 to 10 years. Make sure that you're getting all of the different pieces in place that need to be there, so that you have the authority. You've established that you can do what you need to do, and then you have a program for this is what's going to happen if you don't comply. And then you always must have a way, and you must put this in your notice letters to folks and say that they have a way to appeal. So you want to set up your appeals process. So if you have an authority manager or a borough manager, that's the person that hears the case and issues the verdict, so that the appeal goes to the borough council or the township supervisors or the authority board, and not to the county magistrate system, because you want to keep it local in the system with the people who know what's going on, what the issues are, why you're doing what you're doing. So there's a number of different rules and regs issues from, in terms of what ordinances the townships and the boroughs have to have. That's pretty standard, and your attorneys can tell you exactly which ones you need to have.
Okay.
Well, and I agree. In addition to the mandatory connection ordinances and those sorts of things, to go back to like with what Mike and Eric would be saying, it's also important that in your subdivision and land development ordinance, where you're specking out what the length of pipe should be, how they should be connected, who's going to inspect them, how they're going to be built, all those things. You want to have the latest and greatest. By way of analogy, we had a township that was having a lot of curb and sidewalk failures. We hired literally a concrete engineer to come in and develop a new spec for us. We implemented it. We put it in our subdivision land development ordinance. We haven't had a concrete failure in that township in 15 years. And I think the same thing's true here. If there's something new and it's better, and your joints are better, your lengths are longer, whatever the case may be, whatever the construction method should be, continually update, particularly townships. Boroughs are different. A lot of that stuff is in place, but to the extent that there's, replacements or other things going on, make sure that your engineers have looked to make sure your standards are the best they can possibly be. It's cheap to draft a new ordinance. I mean, you'll spend a little bit of money on it and advertise it and adopt it, but it could save you a lot of money in the long term.
Okay.
So you need to have your ordinances and your rules and regs explicitly say that, infiltration and inflow are not okay, and that you can't have it. And then, here's what the penalty is if you do have it. Penalties is an issue that is going to be political and will differ from one area to the next. They don't have to be the same. What we used was a process that was developed for multiple municipalities, townships, boroughs, and authorities that is essentially a multiplier of your bill. So if you were in the penalty and you were being assessed penalties, it was 3 times your sewer bill on a monthly basis until you corrected the issue. And that has to be based in reality. So you have to have your engineer take a look and say, should it be 2 times, 3 times, or 4 times, or 1.5 times, depending on the actual impact of I&I on the system as a whole. So if I&I is really causing you a lot of problems and you're getting fines and you're having damage to your equipment and stuff, it's pretty easily going to be a 2 times multiplier. So that bill, which was $55 a month at West Branch, was $110 for a 2 times, and $165, or I can't even do math in my head anymore, but it was enough to get people's attention. And we did have a number of hardcore people who said, I don't care. You're not coming in my house. I'm not hiring a plumber. You can find me. And we fined some people for over a year. And they finally said, okay, well, you can come in my house, but you're going to do it my way. And then eventually it became, okay, just come in the house because I'm tired of paying the bill.
Okay.
And, we had a CVS that paid the bill for like 3 years before they figured out that they could actually fix the problem. But, it all, people are the issue. So you have to have a penalty system that's not punitive. You don't want to hurt people. And that's one of the things that townships and boroughs have that are different than authorities. There is a limit to what some, and perhaps Brian can speak to it, but when you get into some of the basic penalties, which is like $300 a day or 30 days in jail or whatever that fundamental penalty is, that's way too much. And if you go to the magistrate,
and judges, you go into court and you say, hey, judge, they've been out of compliance. It's $300 a day. They just look at you like, you got to be kidding me. You know, they're not going to, I mean, you might as well put it in, but they're not going to award it. You've got to come back to that judge a half a dozen times with the same person over and over and over again before you're going to get anything that looks like a fine that really hurts.
And you don't want to fine people punitively. Again, I can't stress that enough. It's not about punishing. It's about getting folks to understand that they have to fix that leaky lateral and or take that sump pump out because there's a real world impact. It just has to happen. And as long as they do it, we would waive the penalties. So at West Branch, we'd say, here's your penalties, and they're adding up. They'd prove that they fixed it, and we'd say, okay, no more penalties. We wipe them off the books so that they don't have to pay. It's not punishment. It's just encouragement to get them to do the right thing.
Okay. Another question from our audience. This is from Pat Burke with Entech. So he asks, how often has the panel had to plug a lateral due to inspection noncompliance? Eric, you're smiling again.
Never. You don't do that. That's not the point.
Was that a trick question?
No, I have seen, and we have, at one point, we did have a discussion with a homeowner about you may have to cut your lateral if you can't stop doing this dangerous thing. It wasn't I&I, it was chemical related. Putting something wrong into the system, something dangerous into the system. But that's a whole other issue that maybe Brian could speak to. But for me, as an administrator, former administrator, you never want to go that far. But there are some times that you might have to consider it.
Okay.
I think in a case where you're putting chemicals down or you have a substantial non-compliance issue, somebody's got a spring in their basement and they're pumping it up into your sewer system. I think the best deterrent there is you take them, you get your fines, you assess penalties, you do things like that. And then you keep, I hate to say it, it's expensive, but you keep going back to court until the court will finally say enough is enough. And, they will enforce, a substantial penalty to fine against the person or enter an order that says you must do X. And if you don't, you'll be in contempt of court, things of that nature. We had one, Mike, I think Mike represents that authority where we had a large 8-inch line coming out of the commercial property that we couldn't get them. It's a very, very, very long line coming down a hill. And we eventually put a meter in. We dug a meter, adjusted the manhole to put a meter in it and said, fine, you're going to now start paying based upon metered flow. And that helped finally get them to kind of come around.
Okay, Mike?
Forgot what I was going to say.
Well, there was a question from the audience. Is it legal or generally permissible to hook up a sump pump or other connection up to a storm sewer? So Mike, you had said that typically is allowed. Is that right?
Yeah, that's typically allowed. To a storm sewer, to a swale. Mine at my house, when the contractor built the house with the sump pump in the basement, it ties into the roof drains, which go out to the curb and run down the street. And that's fine, but it's not supposed to go into a separate sanitary sewer. That's the deal.
Sometimes the storm sewer owners, whether it's the borough or township, don't want you to tap into the pipe. They want you to get it to flow overland into the drain. Yeah. I can understand some liability concerns with that. But the biggest issue is there has to be stormwater there. Again, that's a communication with the borough and the township and a coordination. We would talk to our boroughs and townships about the water authorities, because we were operating water, but we didn't own the water, about doing multi-utility projects on the street. We're going to take all that groundwater out of our system. It's coming up to the surface. It's going to end up on the street and make a giant sheet of ice in the winter. So borough, why don't you work with us to put in a storm sewer to collect that water? And while we're there, why don't we take that 100-year-old water line out because it's right where the storm sewer needs to go. Those sort of coordinated events. But again, whole other roundtable.
There's so many of these I&I ones and sewer stuff. Okay, there is a question from the audience, or keep more questions from the audience. Keep them coming in. This is great. We want to respond to your concerns, but I'm going to do something a little fun right now. The panel doesn't know this is coming. I love this stuff. We are doing. This is Sewer System Survivor. And so the panel doesn't know this is coming, but I'm going to pose the same question to every panelist. And then afterwards, the audience, you guys are going to vote on who out of the panel should be saved from the sewer. Who has the best answer? Sewer System Survivor. And this is the question. What is the most creative way you've used or heard of to get into people's houses to look for I&I? So Mike Sassaman, I'm going to start with you. What's the most creative way you've heard of or seen?
Well, you've got to do it, sugarcoat it a little bit. I always remember seeing a panelist that was a speaker at one of the things I went to, and he got somebody up out of the audience and he said, put your hand up. And he said, he put his hand up like this and he started going like this. And after a little while, the guy said, why are you pushing? He says, because you're pushing me. And it was a pretty common idea that if somebody, you push them, they're going to push back. So I think you got to work with these homeowners to say, this is the problems that we're having. When we get a heavy rain and we know houses have sump pumps and roof drains, our flows go from 1 million gallons a day to 6 million gallons a day in 15 minutes. And we need to work with those customers and homeowners to get that out of there. And there's some things too about that. That's what I was going to mention earlier. Some ways of working with homeowners of how you get these things done instead of sending them a letter that says, you must do this and you've got 8 days to finish it or at your cost. So.
Okay. Okay, Eric, your response. What's the most creative way to get into someone's house?
Well, I would say it was probably one St. Patrick's Day. I went to the bar, which I rarely do these days, but I ran into a customer who was a perennial non-complier. And he just was not going to let us in. So I had to sit there and drink beer with him until I could convince him to let us in. So eventually I wore him down, but I think it took about 6 beers.
I love it. Love it.
That's a good one.
And Brian, what have you heard of out there? What are ways to get into people's houses?
We had one authority that was doing, had sent notices out and was doing smoke testing. And an elderly woman called the fire department because her home was filling up with smoke. And so the fire department went in the house only to discover it was coming up out of her floor drains. And of course, our sewer authority representative got in there to explain why her house was full of smoke. We were mostly concerned that we weren't going to smoke her out of the house or she was going to have some other medical event as a result of her house having smoke in it, but we did, along with the fire company, got into the house.
That is great. Love it. Okay, so thank you all for playing Storm Sewer Survivor. I'm going to launch a poll for our audience and we'll see, okay, who had the most creative answer? Was
Eric.
Was it Mike Sassaman? Was it Eric? Was it Brian?
We never drank our way into a house. But.
I didn't go door to door with a 6-pack, but that, upon second thought,
there's another idea.
Way to try.
That's actually not a bad idea.
Well, it's all about knowing your audience, knowing your people.
To communicate with your customers.
Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds out there in the audience. And we will end the polling and I'll share the results with everyone. Yes, congratulations, Eric Moore. You will be saved from the sewer. A big thanks to Steve Wagner, who kept saying, you got to do a survivor game on one of your roundtables. So we got it done. Okay, so, oh yes, Mike.
The thing that I was going to say earlier, and I couldn't remember, is there's a lot of discussion about getting into people's houses and disconnecting sump pumps and roof drains and all those kind of things. And there's been some discussion with some municipalities that are working with the customers to get it done, and maybe even contributing some money toward getting it done. Because one, you give them a letter and says, you got to do this, and here's the time you got to do it in, and it's all at your cost, and that ticks them off. and they don't want to do it, but maybe they have to. Or maybe you work with them and say, you know what, we're going to give you $250 or $500 or something toward solving this problem, so that maybe that sump pump gets taken out and doesn't get reconnected right away. So I think municipalities and authorities have to work on that kind of an idea, and you get more flies with honey, I guess they say. If you work with people, I think it's a little more acceptable and works out.
Yeah. So that audience member had mentioned they wanted to know what procedures you've used to inspect properties for people who have been non-compliant. Any other suggestions, Eric? Things you've seen that have worked?
Well, when you have someone who's non-compliant, you try to understand why. Sometimes it's a personal political belief, and you can talk to their political peers who have let you in and use that as a way to get to them. We did, in fact, I should have used this as my one. We talked to somebody's mom to get him to comply. So, but you have to find out why they're not compliant. Some folks just don't want you coming in their house because they've got some stuff going on that you should not see. And you need to learn to take a hint to protect your people as much as anything else. If they're growing something unusual in the basement, you might not want to be in the basement. But there are a lot of folks that have other issues. There might be mental health issues sometimes. One of the things that I'm proudest of that we developed was we had a plan with the STEP organization in Lycoming County. So they managed all the programs from the state, like the LIHEAP energy assistance and the customer plans for UGI and PP&L. And we developed a plan with them so that if someone got behind and was in a penalty situation, that they had to go to STEP in order to get a payment plan and then be exposed to all those other programs. And so folks, I think that STEP reported about 85% of the people that got routed to them knew nothing about these other programs, the child care programs, the retraining programs that STEP was managing. They just thought STEP was the people that drove the bus with the handicapped folks around. And so it turned out to be, it didn't get us a lot of money back. It did help us get folks on payment plans, and some of them stuck with it and turned into good customers. But mostly it also helped our vulnerable population to get access to the other benefits that were there. They just didn't know about them. And again, those folks talk amongst themselves. So it's another way to help, we had several folks who were terrified that we were going to come in, find their lateral was bad. They were on fixed income. They had these other problems, and, we're afraid we were going to make them spend all this money. We routed them to STEP on their bill issue, and STEP was able to convince them to let us in that discussion by they'll find a way to help you. Like Mike was saying, you have to be able to be creative to find ways to help folks. There are, in the CDBG program, there's a home improvement program that does allow things like the internal plumbing of the house to be fixed, as well as the CDBG program for what's outside of the wall of the house, which is what we used primarily. So we had one lady with cancer who was in a tough spot. And so we did not enforce on her until we were able to get her grant money. And then we got the piece outside the house fixed. And then I went to the local folks that handled the CDBG stuff. And I said, can we get money for the inside of the house? And unfortunately, the local municipality was not participating in that CDBG program. Why, I can't say, but because they didn't participate, she couldn't get her pipe inside her house fixed, and it was crumbling. It was literally falling apart. So there's all these different ways, and it all comes down to communication, and having good creative ways will spawn more good creative ways and more communication.
I love the way just that you're tying the other community resources together, helping them not in just one way, but dozens of ways. That's such a great success story. I love it. So reminder to the audience, keep sending those questions in. We've got another question from the audience. Is it important to document all of your I&I reduction actions?
Absolutely. And
Go ahead, Eric.
Stop jumping in, but one of the biggest things is that in that case where we were under at West Branch initially capacity restriction or a connection ban, you have to prove how much water you take out in order to get so many allowed in. If you do that with every significant event. So we would plug manholes, but we would throw a flow meter in downstream, and we have it before and after the fix, just to give ourselves a handle on what we're taking out on an individual basis. The more data that you have, the better you will be if push comes to shove with the department.
Excellent. Mike?
That I think the authority members or the council members, they want to know that too. They want to know, what are you doing for all this money you're spending? What are we getting? How much I&I are we eliminating, and so forth? Now, not all of it stays out. Some of it finds its way back in another place. But yeah, documenting everything is important for a bunch of reasons.
Excellent. Okay. Another question from the audience. If a customer, this is from Dave Hugstead with Aqua. Hi, Dave, good to see you. If a customer has issues with their lateral, but are a customer of a private utility, can they still approach their municipality about seeking CDBG funding for repairs?
You know, I don't know how that's working with, say, a municipality sells their sewer system to one of the big companies that take over water and sewer systems, and so I don't think I know the answer to that.
I think that comes back to our first discussion when we first came on the air here. An authority is a municipality, just like a borough and a township. So they can go in and they can work with those programs, but they have to go through the borough or the township. So there was at least one case where we had competing CDBG applications in from the sewer people and the fire department. And we had to talk with each other. And in the end, the sewer department stepped back and said, fire, you guys go ahead. You need more help right now. So it comes down to, you got to funnel it through the borough. So it's worth investigating, I would say. I haven't done it with a private company, but if it's the borough that's applying for the funds or the township that's applying for the funds, I think it'll come down to the program details. So you'll want to talk to the folks who deal with the CDBG program in that area, whoever is the designated by the county as the group that sort of handles that. They should be able to tell you that.
Okay. So one of the, when we did our initial poll, the number one choice from the audience was their concern is how to address I&I and how to track the results. So there's lots of data. And Eric, you mentioned data is good, data is valuable. Mike Sassaman, you need data. Is there like a special I&I spreadsheet?
You need people. You need a person. You need someone who is good with spreadsheets. Or you need to delegate it to your engineer. You just have to have a plan there as far as the data is going to come in. I think my favorite story of this would be a borough that shall remain nameless had televised all of their sewer system and failed to meet their consent order. And so they were in trouble. They brought us in. I was with Larson Design Group at the time. And I said, do you have your video results? And they said yes, and they handed me a big box of VHS tapes. There was no voiceover and nothing typed in, so it was just video from one manhole to another. You didn't know where you were, what street you were on, what manhole number. Totally worthless. So if you don't have somebody in-house that knows how to work a spreadsheet, you're going to struggle. And don't think you can just put it on your admin assistant at the township office, because that's going to be probably a little bit too much. Some folks can handle it, but it's a whole order of magnitude more difficult than a lot of things. So you really do have to have a person who's got a technical mind on staff. We did staff up considerably at West Branch. From the original systems, only had 2 people involved to maintain their systems, which is why they were falling apart. And we had to build, a dig team. A group of guys that could dig as good as a contractor. That was the goal. If we couldn't get them to dig as good as a contractor, then it wasn't worthwhile, and we would just hire a contractor. So we built that team of guys. We trained them, got them the right equipment, and it turned out they were about 60% of the cost of a contractor. So every dig that we did, we saved 40% of the cost of the dig. That helped delay the cost of the equipment and the people. But it also, again, taught our guys a lot about the system and what's good and what's not good, and had a lot of other ancillary benefits along with it. So you need a person, a spreadsheet, some understanding of how it goes and some mapping so that you can keep track of those things. You also want to make sure if you're doing enforcement that you have your ducks in a row, and preferably a database program, but you don't need one. You can do it with a spreadsheet if you have the right kind of person who's going to be diligent and not let stuff go. Because you need to be able to send a letter to Joe Schmo that says, during our inspection, or first off, we need to inspect. And then he doesn't, 30 days later, he's not signed up yet. So we send him another letter. You have 15 days to just get a date set for an inspection. And then we get the inspection. The guys have to know when they're going out there. It has to be coordinated because he might have to take off a half a day of work to let you in because he doesn't have anybody at home that can do that. So then coming out of that, he's got a sump pump. So now you send them a notice, got to take the sump pump out. And that's 30 days later. Hey, buddy, you got to take the sump pump out. You got 15 days. You go on the naughty list. And then he goes on the naughty list and you say, all right, now we're really serious. We're going to start fining you. You're going to get the penalty. And then he says, okay, he does the work. And he says, calls it and says, stop fining me. I did it. And then we say, great. Now I'm going to pass you over to the person who schedules inspections because we have to re-inspect to make sure you're not bullpuckying us. So then you got to go through that again because he's okay. And then he doesn't show up for that inspection. So you have to have someone who can keep track of that. That sounds simple. It is not. You need to have a link between the person that does that scheduling and the people who do the inspecting. That is good. You're using Outlook or some other program that requires the field guy to click, yes, I'm going to be there at this time. So he knows and it's on his calendar and he has to know what Outlook is. And so it was a big quantum leap to get guys who had not ever been computer focused to be able to work with it, but it didn't take long. And then once they got there, they loved it because then it was good communication between the scheduler and the people doing the inspections. It did not require special software. You don't have to spend $50,000 on a certain software suite, but you probably should have GIS because that's the best way to make sure that when your older guys retire, your young talented gals leave and go somewhere else, that you don't lose the knowledge that they have gathered, that it stays there. And every year, this is a cycle. So can I share my screen? I've been waiting to share my screen.
Yeah. I know all the other I&I talks that you had a screen ready to share and you were dying to do it. So yes. Always.
So I drew this up just to help out some clients back in the day, or really to help myself out more than anything else. That gives you this is the cycle of the process. You start with flow metering and flow chasing, and then you decide where you're going to do your work. And you have to have two teams. One's your field team or your local staff. The other is your engineering team or your office staff. And they have their own pieces to get involved with. But you can just see that, yeah, it's a complex process, but it doesn't require a ton of people. And it doesn't require a ton of administrative time once you're up and doing it. But getting there is tough. That's where your engineers can help, and your other fellow municipal systems that have already figured this out, they can help as well. And there are some software suites that can help you with that. But at the end of the day, you're going to have a process where you have to have communication. You have to have tracking of the data to know that, okay, we fixed this issue, take it off the list. We have 10,000 issues. We can only fix 5. Okay, we fixed those 5. Now, which are the next 5 we're going to work on? And by the way, we're now in our cycle. We got all the way to the end of the cycle, and we've put in the new inspection data, and now we've reprioritized. And so we know what our next 5 are. And so you can stay just a little bit ahead, 1 year to the next. And you do need to realize that things like smoke testing can only occur at certain times of year. So if your guys are going to go do smoke testing, they have to block out some time in July and August. They're not going to do it in January and February.
Okay.
A little bit of structure. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but just an expectation for the guys so they know what they're going to do, because that's really tough for them. They have to be able to do a lot of different things. And most of these sewer guys, they're just doing one thing most of the time. Now they're being asked to do a dozen things and talk to a dozen people. And they don't like talking to people. So you have to essentially, give them an understanding of how the process works, help them get there. Once they're there, they're fine. You really won't have to worry about them too much. But it's this cycle of life from data collection to analysis to acting on that analysis and doing more inspection, updating your overall spreadsheet of what your worst things are. And then you do this cycle every year. And if you do it every year, you get good at it, it becomes efficient, and you really can do it at a reasonable cost. And you have all sorts of options. You can do it with your own staff. You can hire Mr. Rehab, a fellow who's been on our one of our other roundtables. You can use your engineer to do this data management. I know Entech does sort of simplified GIS approach that some boroughs use, like Orwigsburg Borough, I think, uses that pretty successfully. So, it's a whole lot of suite of options. Engage with your engineer. They can help you figure out what that plan is, but you got to have a plan, and you got to account for your own people, your own staff, and how they're going to fit in that plan, and help them. Don't just throw it on them. Just be prepared to help them.
Yeah, no, that chart is phenomenal. So someone from the audience, Joe, already said, can you send it out to all of us? So
sure.
Is that,
I did not patent that chart. All I ask is, if you're going to sell it, just, give me a little byline that says, originally developed by this idiot who was too stupid to monetize it. So
yeah, so we'll send that out to everyone who attended today. And a question for the other panelists. Eric spoke a lot about data and different ways to manage it. You also mentioned Entech. We love tying in GIS with Brian Killian came up with this fabulous database. It's really simple because it's Excel based. Most people know Excel. A lot of our clients use it. And if you tie in with someone who's already created one, well, it's already sort of pre-populated, and you can then modify it to exactly what you need in your system. So Mike and Brian, have either of you seen any sort of other ways of of managing data? Because it can be overwhelming.
Spreadsheet, keeping track of it. I think a lot of guys are also keeping a separate map on the wall and color coding it with when you've done televising, where you've done repairs. That leads back to the GIS. If you have GIS, that's a great way to keep track of all that stuff. But just keeping track of what you did, all the things Eric went through of chasing this one customer, you got to keep all of that in your file in order, because if at the end it goes sour, you need all of that data to follow up and see that it gets finished out.
And to give to your solicitor, so when he has to go in front of the magistrate, ultimately that you have a documented case. You have all your, we would keep customer files, so right. Every letter that we sent, copy goes in the customer file. Every action that we took is documented in the customer file. Whatever phone conversations that we had, we put in the file. It's hard to get it perfect, and you're never going to be perfect, but at least having some meat in that folder will help you when you have to go to the mat with someone who's just not going to comply.
The other thing I would add too is that if you're staying far enough out in front of DEP, and the data that you're collecting now, as long as you're all intellectually honest with that data and what it says and so forth, that's important, because even though you have some hot spots and you'd rather kind of not know about them and maybe not monitor those areas, it's important to collect that data, because when DEP starts kind of catching up to you from behind, you want to be able to demonstrate that you have eliminated stuff. And if you've had your head in the sand the whole time and not really ever monitored that high flow area, you're not really going to be able to show how much. It's going to be tougher to show how much you actually eliminate. Now, you'll have flows at the plant that you can say, gee, our overall flows are down. But when you're trying to show that you decrease flows by 10,000 or 20,000 gallons, depending on the size of your plant, you're not going to pick it up down there. You need to be able to get the data ahead of time, get out in front of it. So later on, you can say, oh, that area that had, I eliminated 20,000 gallons out of this area right over here, because here's my data from October of 19. here's my data from November of 2020. Look what I did. So that's part of getting way out in front of DEP.
Okay. So another question from our audience. Would you recommend any other specific digital work management programs available for asset tracking and inspection logging for smaller municipalities to help data tracking and help find major issues before they occur? So
shameless self-promotion. At West Branch, we were not tied to Entech as our engineer. We used Larson, we used Entech, and in other cases, we used a different engineer. What we said to the staff, what I said to staff is, we had hired a GIS kid right out of school. We had a partnership with Bloomsburg University to send us an intern every year from their GIS department. And that's how we built our GIS system. Didn't have to be expensive because interns were cheap, but we did pay them because they are human beings and they were having to drive all the way into Muncie to be able to work for us. We did still treat them like interns though. So, but at the end of the day, we built the system that way. And, we looked at, a year later, I think after we had a functional system, I said to them, okay, now figure out, here's our bare bones system. It works, but it's slow. It's not the most facile thing, isn't the most tools. Go look at Lucidity and go look at these other I&I, or not I&I, but maintenance and inspection management databases that are out there that cost, $80,000 and then $15,000 a year to maintain. And
Not
so
easy to use, yeah.
we built a matrix of, what do we value? Is it user interface, 1 to 10? How important is that? The power of it, how many tools and functions? And then we weighted each of those categories with a multiplier for how important it was to us. And we talked to all the staff members involved. And at the end of the day, the simplified Entech system won by a landslide because the guys loved it in the field because they could use it. It wasn't intimidatingly difficult. The person that we had in the office who was our spider at the middle of the web who collected all the data, he loved it because he was good at Excel, but he was not at all familiar with these other things. And it was way cheaper than these other alternatives. We didn't need all that detail. We didn't need all the proprietary fees that come with it. And over the long term, it was significantly cheaper to have an Excel-based system. And we had the opportunity to say, we're managing that. Entech, you build it, you give it to us, and then thank you. We'll call you if you have any problems. And so at the end of the day, we were using them to implement all of that. And I think Orwigsburg uses that. I think their guys have the ability to put data in, then Brian can see it and they can talk about it and then change the priorities. So it's a collaborative tool. It does all the things that you need at way lower price. So shameless self-promotion, I think the Entech process was hands down the best approach. But I know other folks like Lycoming County Water and Sewer Authority used Lucidity. I don't know how well that they got along with that program. I think Williamsport used their own internal system. Okay. So there's a lot of options out there.
Any other feedback on that question, you guys? Okay, I see we're coming up on 3:15. So what I want to do, I'm always respectful to our audience. So I want to pull up just a couple final slides. And there we go. As far as future Entech roundtables, want to make sure everyone's aware. During this COVID time, we've been doing them every 2 weeks. Thank you so much for people who've been tuning in. Sort of a sister roundtable. I'm helping out PICS with pre-treatment gone viral. That's the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's tomorrow at 11 a.m. So it's through the pre-treatment information exchange, the Lehigh Valley chapter. Tori Morgan from our office is very involved with them. So if you're interested, go to lvpics.org for more information. Entech will have one final roundtable in this year, which I cannot wait for. I know some people have already been practicing, but it's have a beer with an engineer, old timers share what I tell my 21-year-old self. So very excited about that in 2 weeks. And if you want more information on registering for these or any past videos for roundtables you may have missed, or you love them so much you want to watch again, go to entecheng.com. The bottom right, look for our roundtable recast and look for more in 2021. We're excited to give you more of what you've been enjoying. So huge thank you to my panel. We will still be addressing some questions, but I want to make sure that our audience has this contact information. If you have questions, feel free to email Mike Sassaman, Eric Moore with Entech, and Brian Boland. Love having your input and expertise on this panel. If you're interested in getting a PDH certificate or an operator CEH, please email me afterwards. If you're an operator, a wastewater operator, give me your license number. And so panel, we still have a couple questions from the audience, and I'll leave this information up for a few minutes. So question from Joel George is, who rehabs manholes in the area? But I'm not sure what the area is. I double checked his email address. I'm not sure. Mike?
I answered this question to Joel earlier today, but I guess I'd pass it on to Eric. I told him USG is a company that repairs manholes. Eric, do you have any other suggestions?
Mr. Rehab. He was an old resource of mine over the years as a consultant. And also, it's not that hard to teach your own staff. If you have staff as an authority or a borough township sewer system, a lot of the basic manhole rehab stuff you can do yourself. The big stuff, the lining and other big repairs, Mr. Rehab's been the primary guy that I would go to over the years.
That's a good one to add. Joel's from the borough of Palmerton, and they had a manhole that kind of collapsed. The whole bottom end of it. They were paving the road using a vibratory roller, and they think they might have some damages. So Mr. Rehab would be another one to check with Joel.
Okay, excellent. And we got one more question from the audience. With COVID and more people working from home or just at home, has there been a boom in home inspection rates? And I'm not sure what that means.
Just the opposite. I don't think anybody's getting in anybody's homes right now.
Yeah, that's the bigger thing is, do you really want to go into homes right now? And I would say no. That's an employee safety issue.
I would say too, from a liability standpoint, you have sovereign immunity as an authority or a township or a borough. I'm not sure that you probably A, want to expose your employees to what might be in the home, or B, have your employees exposed to what, exposing somebody in the home during this time. So unless it was an emergency, I'd probably say, I probably would keep people out of the house for both reasons on both sides. I think you just have less liability issues there.
Good point. Okay, so that's it for questions from our audience. Any final ideas or comments from the panelists? Anything else to share? Yes,
yeah.
Eric.
Do I get a crown for being the survivor? I mean, I've got tiara envy, so I got some space to fill up here.
Yes, you do.
All right.
I was at Burger King the other day, and I think they were handing those out.
I think it's Mike that goes into the sewer pipe. I was second. He was
Oh my God. So a huge thank you. Thank you to my panelists. You guys are amazing as always. Such good information. I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did as well. Thank you to our viewers. Thank you so much for these excellent questions and making sure we're addressing your I&I needs. And I always end these roundtables by saying magical things happen when you bring together passionate people. And you guys are passionate about I&I and sewer and poops, and I'm excited. That's fabulous. So thank you, and I hope we can spread this excitement out to the community. So thank you, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.